I would like to introduce you to singer Anitta, this lovely bombshell that is set up in the Brazilian slums. She was currently last week at Harvard University, explaining herself as an entrepreneur. Can you believe that? But to look better at Anitta's skin and her tiny bikini, I'm going to borrow some Abi Warburg's thesis. Abi Warburg was a German researcher. We do have an institute here in London that bears his name, that understood image as a symbolic way of transforming the environment. So in his point of view, images carry meaning. And when we had our last session, we were discussing why do we do smart textiles? Because we are looking for meaning in our daily lives. And I come from a part of the world where meaning is very, very important. That's what moves people when they don't have money to keep going on. In order to start, I'd like to put you in the same conditions of the country where I come from and the area of the world. This is a slum in Brazil. It's one of our biggest. It's called Rocinha in Rio de Janeiro. You see that's not really an urbanism. People just get, well, building their shelters the way that they can, with the materials that they can. So these are communities that have very particular ways of life and where privacy is meaningless. Everything is public because people live together in a sense of tribal village. And skin is always touching skin. And second skin is always intertwined with the urbanism and the city dwellings. This is true for all Latin American slums. In Brazil, slums we call favela, and people who live at slums are called favelados. So we are going to talk about places, people, and the layers that are put on top of this. In order to make you closer to the place where I come from, I would like to tell you a tale that I told Danka yesterday about indigenous tribes in Central America. I also teach around Latin America, and once I was in Panama, and I came to know a group of Indians that had a very nice handicraft. They sold a sort of patchwork, layers and layers of textile that was created and molded as a sculpture to be sold to tourists. And as I was talking to the craftswoman that was preparing one of them, I wanted to buy, so I was sort of making my deal with her. I asked her how she did it and how was the conditions of production. Very sustainable, my discussion. That's when she told me that usually they used to do that on the skin. It was a scarification process. But when the Spanish conquerors came, a few centuries before, they were scalping the Indians to sell their skin as a trophy. So the Indians started to scalp the Spanish people, on the other hand, and get their, through piracy, get their textiles and build their handicraft on European textiles to sell to Europeans. So they sort of reversed the meaning of the torture that they were suffering and created a new way of mixing our first skin and our second skin and creating a journey that goes as a tradition in Latin America today. So we're talking about contrasts. This is another favela in São Paulo. It's called Paraisópolis, which means Heaven's Place. That is just beside huge condos, as you can see. This is a very famous picture by photographer Tuca Vieira, who was also shown here at Tate Modern at some point in an exhibition called Global Cities a few years ago. So these images of favelas are traveling towards the world through handicrafts, souvenirs, most of them made of textiles, and also through media. That's why we understand that media has a very important role in the creation, the mythification of the way that South American people show themselves to the world and build their appearance. You'll see a list of soap operas and TV series shown by Netflix since year 2005, with the first one, Rosario Tijeras, that was created in Colombia, and then a list of many, many series. Narcos is the one that's pretty known, that concentrate their settings in these favela scenarios. Why am I talking about this? Slums created and developed such a way of life by showing their inhabitants possessions in their own bodies that they also created a view of Latin America around the world. And this view is pretty much based on, unfortunately, on drug dealing. This is Santo Domingo, Savio in Medellin, Colombia. It's another favela. And Santo Domingo was created by drug lord Pablo Escobar in the 80s. Pablo Escobar is one of the drug lords that is highly distributed to media, his story, because he was really, really cruel, and he got in charge of the drug dealing around Latin America. And when he was truly rich, he started to sell drugs to North America, and he established his empire in Miami. At that time, in the 80s, bombshell Pamela Anderson, that you see right there, she was starring in a soap opera or TV series called Baywatch. And as you can see, she has big busts and big bosom. And she was a 34D. At the time, she became a playmate and became a 34DD. And swimwear had to be done specially for her. At that time, the drug lords were taking their women to live with them in Miami, and these women started to watch soap operas. As they did so, they wanted to become Pamela Anderson. What did they do to become Pamela Anderson? They started to do surgeries and implants, especially silicone implants, but they didn't have enough money to do so. So this was not chirurgical silicone, but industrial silicone, that all the doctors can tell me this migrates through the body. So in a few years, we had these beautiful angels transformed into monsters and living a public health problem, which was enhanced by all the fashion images. You see that the mannequins were created to fit and suit that image of a North American star system bombshell that was in the Playboy pages, through women that were indigenous rooted, had a different skin color, and could never look like bombshells. Actually, they looked like this in order to maintain their bodies minimally shaped during that time. You can see that fashion became so important to the favelados that even the bag of the woman has the shape of the mobility means of transportation, which is the subway that links the favela to downtown. So these people started to communicate their ways of life through elements of their second skin, including some designers that started to develop their brands toward these stories and creating different sizes in the industry for our second skin. So garments were developed in various sizes that wouldn't be found anywhere else in the world because nobody had such body shape. This is Daniel Hoyos that created the brand Divino in Medellin, and you see the other side of the same song, which is Carlos Valenzuela. This is a fashion show from Spring-Summer 2010. Carlos Valenzuela showed the kidnapped people. This, after being kidnapped for a while, people that entered into the drug dealing system, when they were released, they had long hair and skin modifications and also a different skin color due to living in the jungle. So you see that he adapted this to the catwalk in order to show people what was happening in Colombia through his international fashion shows. He used to show at Pasarela Cibeles in Madrid. So when he brought, not only the clothes, you see that this is the saint that people pray for, and this is a written restricted area, so it's a military warning. His clothes had a symbolic meaning, but also his models were showing through their skin what was happening in Latin America at that time. The first time I taught in Colombia, when I arrived at the hotel, my room had a lot of shots in the wall. And I asked, what happened here? Oh, no, it was because the drug gang entered the hotel. It was the Intercontinental Hotel. It was a very good hotel at the time. It was the best hotel that they had. So it was a daily situation that they had to cope with. And the ways of expressing this through their creativity was tracing it back to their own clothes. Because when you are at war, and this was really a war, you have to take all your possessions on top of your body. You cannot leave your jewelry at home because you might need to leave immediately. So these people had to wear all their history on top of their bodies. And their skin suffered the consequence of being constantly runny, because the favelas, not only in Medellin, but also in Mexico City, in Brazil, they got all the outcasts that were taken out of their lands so that the drug lords could plant drugs in their land. These migrations brought up consistent favelas and huge favelas in major Latin American cities. But who are these people who live in the favelas? These people were the low-income people that used to be farmers. We're talking about Indians. We're talking about former slaves. So we're talking about a miscellaneous, a mestizo land, or the mingling of various ethnic roots that were simply outcasted from their place and had to move into the city with their habits and all their possessions on top of their bodies. So the Brazilian landscape, for a long time, was being developed in the imaginary of European cities through travelers' paintings and literature. And nowadays, it's done by Netflix and Instagram. But for a long, long time, people really didn't visit that area of the world and didn't know how these people lived. So here we have a painting by Albert Eckhout. He was a member of the Dutch court that went to Brazil in the 17th century, and his function was the same as Netflix. He was supposed to paint huge paintings of the inhabitants wearing their best looks in order to get a different approach with the King of Denmark. These paintings are all in the Denmark National Museum in Copenhagen, because his function was actually to reinvent the ideal of the Brazilian. You see that he paints typically in the way that you see European paintings of the time. He paints a slave, but she has the most perfect body, perfectly dressed as well. Look at her skirt, so clean after walking a lot, after working. She has a perfectly grown-up kid. Probably he eats broccoli in breakfast very happily, as all kids does, and doesn't want to go to McDonald's. So you see a Brazilian landscape that looks perfectly good to make Mauricio de Nassau, who was the Dutch lord, nobleman that was in Brazil, get an upgrade in the Dutch society by handling so well the non-civilized people that lived in South America. But this has consequences. The indigenous people didn't like that much that way. So what they decided to do was to implement their way of life in their daily dressing. You see here, the High Xingu. Xingu is a river in the middle of Brazil, close to the jungle. It's not the jungle yet. It's the previous land before the jungle. I'll be wrapping up. The Xingu Indians would develop their own ways to dress. These are uluri tongs that are pretty similar to bikinis. So you see that these images were migrating. And finally, fashion is seen as a secondary media that will expand the body presence through time when the indigenous people decide to produce ceramics in the shape of bikinis, not only to wear, but also to sell to tourists. So we see that the images, as provoked by Warburg, are traveling toward the words. Finally, how does this relate to the body? This is photographer Angelica Dassen that created a Pantone scale by photographing Brazilians and putting the Pantone scale to see the exact shade of the skin. So with this, women go to the tanning areas or tanning clinics, present this to the tanning lady and say, I want to have this color skin or that color skin. So we start to customize appearance and bring these mingled and mestizo looks through media to daily commercial activities. I'm going to, in order to wrap up, I'm going back to Bombshell Anita. This is her latest invention from her video clip. She's a funk singer. Funk is a development of hip-hop in Latin America. She created a masking tape bikini in order to have the perfect tan. But this, again, has strong and violent health issues concerning this look, especially because it's being spread through Instagram. That's the video clip. The song is called Vai Malandra, which would be something like Go Witty in English, in order to create clinics of tanning on top of favela rooftops. So now women from the elite, because they saw the image as people that visit Denmark's museum see a Kautz painting, they see the images in Netflix, they see Anita video clip, they go to the slums or to the favelas in order to get the same tan. This was mainly diffused by video clips before Anita. Michael Jackson showed the favelas, Pharrell showed the favelas, but when she did so, she did something different. She explained to women through media how to prepare their masking tape bikini at home. So women started to wear proudly and show it on Instagram, how pretty they looked, how perfect was the tanning. Then you create an industry of street vendors that sell to poor people these conditions that will become them miserable because their skin probably will have amazing issues. The most funny thing is that we have an industry that's selling through e-commerce. This is eBay. Masking tape bikinis in shapes. As you can see, this is the Wonder Woman shape. These are the perfect, so that you can get the perfect tan. Even for Carnival with Swarovski crystals. And they really look like prostitutes, I know. It's not really pretty. But it's a massive trend, commercial trend, that comes to major TV channels as a zoo. There are animals being shown in a zoo. That's something that really makes me horrified and highly preoccupied on how will public health deal with these issues when this become a major trend among women that can continue and become actually serious, have serious consequences. I'm not a scientist, but I can imagine that putting glue on your skin and going to the sun after all I heard today and staying like 1 hour without sunscreen every day in order to get the perfect shape or the perfect tanning and go along with the Brazilian wax. Most of you women probably heard about it, right? It's for you, man. You just put very, very hot bee wax on your body and get the hair off. It's highly painful. It's another form of torture. And then again, I keep asking you, and that's a question for you, what's going to happen with our second skin and above all, with our first skin when our clothes become imaginary contents to transform us into something else? Let's be ourselves. Thank you.